Hey everybody, welcome to the videos for my final picks for week 4 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. This is a more finalized and polished version of the first look I do earlier in the week. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. I'll be here all season long talking picks, strategy, lineups, amongst other things. I think that sounds good. You want to hang out for the rest of the year, you might as well hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And if you want to take that one step further and become an official member over on Patreon, now is the best time to do so, considering it's the first of the month, so you get your best bang for your buck. You get access to my entire spreadsheet with all the players, all the data you never need, color-coded nice and neat, so it's very easy to follow. Projections, ownership projections, my optimizer, cheat sheets, and my Discord community. I do cover other sports as well, so the all sports package does have a lot of value right now, considering we're going to have basketball coming up soon, baseball, NASCAR, and obviously the NFL. So if you want to check that out, link is down below. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're signing over on Prize Picks, you can get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100, so it's free money when I use it to your advantage. When you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think it'll be it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. I think there's several ways to go this week, whether you want to spend up, go in the mid-range, or spend down a little bit to save some money. We'll start up top with the two heavy hitters in Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Now, I personally have a personal preference on where I want to go if I had to pick between these two. But we'll start with Patrick Mahomes here, $8,100 in what is perceived to be a bad matchup versus Philly through the first 3 weeks of the season, considering they have been pretty tough on quarterbacks, allowing the 8th fewest points per game and their 13th DVA versus the pass. I think these numbers are going to get worse as the season progresses. I definitely don't think they're going to be able to stop Patrick Mahomes and the high-flying Chiefs offense. I realize they're 1-2 in the season, but this should be a get-right game here for the Kansas City Chiefs. This game features a 54.5 point over-under. They have a team total just south of 31, and they're 7-point favorites on the road. And I definitely think this could be a big game for the Chiefs' passing attack. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is also a viable option as well. You might see when we cover running backs, but nothing bad to say about Mahomes. He's got the two best weapons in football in Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. He's averaging over 300 passing yards per game and 3 touchdowns. He is throwing some interceptions this year, but I mean, Mahomes versus Philly, I think he should be just fine. Although I do prefer Josh Allen here at $8,000. He had his first big blow-up game of the season last week versus Washington after having a pretty rough 2 weeks. But I mean, this is a great spot versus Houston. The only concern here is because I think Josh Allen should absolutely smash in this matchup, especially at home versus one of the worst teams in football, if not the worst team in football. The only concern here is that they are 17-point favorites. They do have a team total of 32.5. The problem is I don't think this is going to be a close back and forth game. Like for Mahomes, that game should be a little bit more back and forth. I could see the Eagles kind of hanging on for a little bit. This could just be a boat race for the Buffalo Bills, and they just absolutely destroy the Texans. So they might have to throw the ball too much in the second half. The thing is, though, if that happened, it's probably because Josh Allen already had a huge game. So by halftime, if he has like 25 points, there's a good chance that he could still end with around 30-something, which it's obviously going to be just fine. I know he's pretty expensive here at $8,000, but I am currently projecting him to be the highest owned quarterback on the slate, and I totally get it. If you want to play him in cash games, I say go for it. I've been kind of leaning his way towards tournaments more so than cash, just because I feel like we can get Jalen Hurts in cash games, and I just feel like this floor is a little bit safer there. But Josh Allen, man, is in a fantastic spot. Houston should not be able to stop him whatsoever so far in the season. 7th DVA versus the pass, but they're still 24th versus quarterbacks, allowing nearly 300 yards per game. So Allen and all his buddies, Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, maybe even Dawson Knox, should have a very solid game on Sunday. And I'm not too concerned about him being a 17-point favorite. Now dropping down to the mid-range here, we have Matthew Stafford and Jalen Hurts. Stafford, I think, is a better tournament option. Meanwhile, Jalen Hurts, I think, is an excellent cash game option due to his high floor with his rushing ability. We'll start with Stafford here, though. He went off last week around 32 fantasy points. It's another good matchup here versus Arizona. The game features a 54.5 point over-under with a team total close to 30 here and only a 4.5 point spread. So this game should be pretty back and forth. And I don't think it's going to be super chalky either. I think there's going to be some guys that do have high ownership like Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, but outside of those guys, I don't really think it's going to be a very high-owned game. So I definitely like targeting it for tournaments. He's also averaging 313 passing yards per game, just like Patrick Mahomes, 3 passing touchdowns. He's just not throwing as many picks. He's also averaging 10 yards per attempt so far, which is extremely nice. He's got some good down-the-field options in Van Jefferson and Deshaun Jackson, 2 excellent wide receivers in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, and Cooper Kupp's been among the elites so far this season. I'm not too scared of this Arizona pass defense, despite them being 3rd DVA versus the pass so far this season, but I definitely think Stafford is an excellent tournament option, which should be a very high-scoring game at home in LA. Then Jalen Hurts, I think he's your cash game quarterback this week if you're not playing Josh Allen. If you want to save some money, I think Jalen Hurts is an excellent option here. KC has been terrible defensively this season. Baker Mayfield had a great week 1. Lamar Jackson had a great week 2. Justin Herbert killed them week 3. And they're terrible on the ground. They allowed Lamar Jackson to get over 100 rushing yards, and Jalen Hurts one of the best rushing quarterbacks in all of football. An elite passer or anything, he's still averaging 60 rushing yards per game. He did have over 300 passing yards last week versus Dallas when they were playing in catch-up mode, so it's hard to not like Hurts here. I mean, Kansas City is 32nd DVA versus the pass right now, and they're also nearly dead last versus the run as well. And they're allowing the third most points to the quarterback position and over 43 rushing yards per game to quarterback. So I think Hurts, if you're trying to save some money in cash games and just trying to get a nice high floor quarterback with some upside, I think Hurts is your guy there. It's a 7-point dog at home. And if you're looking for a, not maybe a dirt cheap quarterback, but a cheaper quarterback, you have Sam Darnold, even at 6K here in a decent matchup versus Dallas. Their defense is a little bit better than expected, I would say, heading into the season, especially how bad they were last year. This game does feature a 15.5 point over-under, which is pretty good. It's a 5-point spread. He's on the road, no CMC, so they'll probably rely on Darnold just a little bit more, but he's been pretty good so far this season through 3 weeks on Carolina. He's averaging close to 300 passing yards per game. Only one passing touchdown, but the rushing touchdowns have actually been there for Sam Darnold. Well, I don't think that's really going to continue. Dallas's defense is still bleeding points to the quarterback position. Yes, Diggs has been great on the outside, but they're still on the 4th most points per game to quarterbacks, 14th DVA versus the pass, and nearly 350 passing yards allowed per game. So I think Sam Darnold at that price point, if you can't afford Hurts, Stafford, Allen, Mahomes, or whatever it may be, I think Darnold's an excellent cheap option, plus his wide receivers and pass catching options aren't that expensive as well. Then moving on to the running back position, we have two studs up top in Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. We'll start with Derrick Henry here, just shy of $9,000. He's the volume king. I don't think it's ever a bad day to play Derrick Henry because you're always going to get that guaranteed volume, nearly 30 touches on the ground. And nowadays, he's getting work through the air, which we never really expected from Derrick Henry. Like, we were lucky to get a target or two. Now he's getting multiple targets per game. And there's a chance that Julio Jones and A.J. Brown could be out for this game, so they could just really rely on Derrick Henry, maybe get over 5 targets, which would be incredible usage from Derrick Henry because we know how good he's on the ground. The problem was in the past, we never got any work from the passing game on a PPR site like DraftKings. Definitely kind of sucks a little bit, but he's being used in the passing game now. If we're looking at his target share in the season, we're talking 13%, which in the past, Derrick Henry's like a 3 to 5% target share kind of guy. So if he's going to give me 4 targets per game and catch 4 balls per game, which he has done the first 3 weeks, I will take that all day from a guy that's averaging nearly 30 rushing attempts per game, rushing touchdown, and 4.4 yards per carry, nearly 120 rushing yards. Added the fact that this is a great matchup versus the Jets. They're 13th DVA versus the run, but they're also 30th versus running backs, allowing over 30 DraftKings points per game and over a rushing touchdown. Also allowing over 7 catches and 60 receiving yards as well. So all around, this is a great spot for Derrick Henry. If A.J. Brown and Julio Jones are out, they're just going to run the ball down New York's throat, I think, the entire game. They're 7.5-point favorites. Team total close to 27. I love Derrick Henry, whether it be cash games or tournaments this weekend. Also like Alvin Kamara, like $8,400. I actually think he might be higher owned than Derrick Henry just because he's a little bit cheaper. He gets a good matchup versus the Giants. 8.5-point favorites here, 26-point implied team total. And he's just an elite pass catching running back, although I will say he's averaging 4.3 targets per through 3 weeks compared to Derrick Henry at 4. So I'm kind of leaning the Derrick Henry out, even though I think Alvin Kamara could pick up more ownership. It's a good spot here. Giants are 23rd DVA versus the run, 25th versus running backs, allowing close to 30 DraftKings points per game. And they're also giving a lot of yards through the air to running backs, nearly 70 receiving yards per game on 7 catches. So don't think you can go around with either running back here. I guess I would say whoever fits your lineup the best, but both are in a very similar spot, and both are some of the elites at the position. Then if you're looking to save some money, we have Najee Harris at $6,800 coming off a 19-target game, which is absolutely insane at the running back position. There's a lot of wide receivers that wish they could have 19 targets through 2 weeks. So Najee Harris killed it through the air last week, over 100 receiving yards. And it's mainly due to the fact that there were some injuries for wide receivers, and Big Ben just cannot throw a football down the field right now. He's just dumping it off to Najee Harris every single play. The guy looks super unathletic back there. I'm sure we all saw the video of him just falling over, throwing that. It wasn't really a shovel pass, but just a little, whatever you want to call it. It was like to the tight end, like 4 yards away from him. But with the Steelers being 7-point dogs on the road here in Green Bay, I could see another scenario where Najee Harris is getting a ton of dump-offs. Through 3 weeks, he's averaging 9 targets per game, close to 7 catches, has a 21% target share, which is a little bit lower than Alvin Kamara, but the Steelers do throw the ball a lot more than New Orleans Saints. And the Packers really aren't that great versus running backs. They haven't been for a couple years. 28th DVA versus the run, and 19th versus running backs. So Najee Harris, I think, is a very high-floor running back. I know he's been terrible on the ground this year, mainly due to his offensive line. I think he's getting touched or getting contact behind the line of scrimmage on 70% of his run plays, which is obviously dead last in the league. Only 3.1 yards per carry so far. But if he's going to give us the work in the passing game, not really too concerned about it. Then DeAndre Swift at $6,200. He's been a big pass catcher running back so far this season, averaging nearly 8 targets per game so far and over 6 catches per game. He's not getting a ton of work on the ground. While the head coach for the Lions did say we're going to see a lot more DeAndre Swift moving forward, which is obviously music to our ears because DeAndre Swift's only $6,200, and realize the matchup here versus the Chicago Bears isn't exactly great. They're 11th versus running backs, although they are allowing over 100 rushing yards per game. But they did play Cleveland last week, who Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. So obviously did some damage on the ground. It's a very small sample size in the season, but the understood the $6,200. I mean, he's fine either way because if they fall behind, he's just going to pepper with targets, and if they're playing from the lead, and they're playing with the lead and having success, and if they're playing the lead having success on the ground, Swift will excel in that category as well. So I think Swift is an excellent play at only $6,200. Chuba Hubbard here, $5,900. He played around 70% of the snaps once CMC went down last week. He gets an okay matchup here versus Dallas. They've been a lot worse versus the pass this season compared to the run. I believe they're 12th DVA versus the run, and allowing the 8th fewest points per game to the position. But they are allowing close to 9 catches and 60 receiving yards per game. And Hubbard will be using the passing game. We saw that last week, so I think he's fine. It's going to be a high-scoring game, only $5,900 for a starting running back. What has been a good football team so far. Don't mind that, but he's definitely not nearly as good as CMC. I think we all saw that on Thursday night. David Montgomery, $5,800. I think he's going to be very popular in cash games this week just because of the price point. I know Chicago's offense looked absolutely brutal last week. I mean, terrible. With like 29 total passing yards. They could just not get anything going whatsoever. But David Montgomery is going to get the volume. This is a great matchup versus Detroit. They're 26th DVA versus the run, and they're 23rd versus running back so far. Last season, I believe they were like dead last DVOA, so I don't really think much is going to change there. So I think only $5,800. Running back that should see 15, 20 total touches, maybe more if they're having success. Definitely like Montgomery a lot at that price. Then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, $5,400. He was pretty chalky last week, and I think people are not going to play him as much as they did just because there's other options here like Hubbard, David Montgomery in the same price range. But he's a 7-point favorite on the best offense in football with a team total close to 31. He actually looked pretty good on the ground last week. Got into the end zone by virtue of a passing touchdown from Patrick Mahomes, but he's averaging 4.3 yards per carry this season, close to 15 rushing attempts per 63 rushing yards. They're not really using him much to the air, which is kind of weird because he was good at that in college, but I still think $5,400 going against a team that's 22nd DVA versus the run and 22nd points allowed, also allowing 120 rushing yards per game. Don't mind Clyde Edwards-Helaire once again this week, although he's a bit more expensive, but he still seems a bit underpriced. Moving on to the wide receiver position, I try to simplify this as much as I can because there's so many wide receivers to talk about. It all just depends on what quarterback you're using or what game you're stacking, because if you're using Patrick Mahomes, yes, pair him up with Tyreek Hill, that's his number 1 wide receiver, or Travis Kelce, or whoever it may be. If you're using Jalen Hurts and one of his pass-catching options, and Devontae Smith, who we do have on the screen here, run it back with a guy like Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce. It just makes sense to correlate your wide receivers as much as possible, so I don't want to talk about each and every single wide receiver individually here, although I will highlight some just in case I didn't talk about their quarterback or really highlight that game too much. But Tyreek Hill, already talked about Mahomes, you guys get the idea. I know he's had 2 down weeks in a row, but he always seems to pop off when people don't expect it. And also Philly has been the best team versus opposing fantasy wide receivers so far this season, but I don't care. Tyreek Hill, I think he's in for a big game this week, so I love him in tournaments. Adams, he's the best wide receiver in football. He's below $8,000. People are going to see the matchup versus Pittsburgh and steer away because they have a perceived good defense. But through 3 weeks so far this year, they're actually not that great versus the pass. They're 27 versus wide receivers and 23rd DVA versus the pass. And also Devontae Adams leads the league with a near 38% target share and an 87% weighted opportunity share with a 43% market share of the team's air yards. Over 11 targets per game, over 8 catches, and over 100 receiving yards. So below 8K seems like a pretty good value in my opinion. Cooper Kupp, the price is skyrocketing, but I think it's deserved, especially how good he's been this year. He's actually second in target share behind the guy we just talked about, Devontae Adams, with a 35.5% target share and a 77% weight opportunity share. But I already talked about Stafford, so if you're using Stafford, you got to use some of his pass catching options because if you use the quarterback, you're assuming their pass catching options are going to have good games. So it just makes sense to correlate it with guys like Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, or Tyler Higbee, whoever it may be. I'm personally team Robert Woods this week. I have no issues with wanting to play Cooper Kupp. I think he's one of the best wide receivers to use on the entire slate. This is a good matchup versus Arizona. I think at the end of the season, we're going to see Robert Woods' target share getting closer and closer to Cooper Kupp. And Robert Woods is nearly $3,000 cheaper than Cooper Kupp this week. So I'm really just trying to buy low on Robert Woods. So if you want to play Kupp, no problem with that at all. I think he's an excellent cash game option or tournament option, whatever it may be. But I really like Robert Woods' price tag this week. But I mean, nothing wrong with Cooper Kupp. He's been amazing so far this season. Stephon Diggs, if you're using Josh Allen, Diggs hasn't exactly been the greatest thing this season. He's still averaging 10 targets per game, but Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders are definitely eating into his workload a little bit, or just at least production. But at some point, Stephon Diggs will blow up, and I would not be surprised if it's here versus Houston. And obviously, if you're using Allen, great pairing option with them. Terry McLaurin, I'm not a huge fan of McLaurin this week, but I do like the price point. He's got close to a 30% target share in the season. Good matchup as a wide receiver versus Atlanta. If they're going to move the ball at all here, definitely think it's going to be because of Scary Terry, especially with Antonio Gibson banged up a little bit in practice. Then DJ Moore, if you're using Sam Darnold, it would be kind of stupid not to play him with DJ Moore. Although even in cash games this week, I think DJ Moore might end up being the highest on wide receiver on the entire slate. That's currently what I have projected, but it makes sense. Besides Diggs, I mean, the Dallas defense isn't really too scary as a wide receiver. I mean, he will see some Diggs, which obviously he's been really good so far this year, but they're still bleeding points to the position. They're allowing the 5th most points per game and over 200 receiving yards, specifically to wide receivers. And without CMC, that's going to be a boost to pretty much everybody in the offense, because when you take a guy out that can get around 30 total touches per game, especially a good chunk of that being through the air, it's definitely going to be a boost for guys like DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Terrace Marshall, whoever it may be. So I definitely like Moore a lot. It was excellent last week early on. I know it was the Texans, but this is still another really good matchup. This should be a pretty high-scoring game. And he feels a little bit too cheap for a guy that has a 31% target share in the season. And we could definitely see that rise with CMC being out. Deebo Samuel, $6,500. I think he's a good tournament option here. He's averaging 10 targets per game, over 100 receiving yards. Has a 33% target share on the season. Plus, sales not that great versus wide receivers. They weren't last year, and they're continuing that. 27th DVA versus the pass, and they're 18th versus the position, allowing nearly 200 receiving yards per game. So I think Samuel's fine in tournaments, but not really much of a cash game play in my opinion. But this should be a decently high-scoring game. I don't think a lot of people are going to play too much players from it, so it could be a good low-owned tournament spot. Then Amari Cooper, $6,000. He's been pretty quiet for a couple weeks, and I really do like CeeDee Lamb. I just mainly have him on here because of the price point, and this should be a high-scoring game. I know Carolina's had a very good defense so far this year, but I'm not really too impressed with the teams they've played so far, and this is definitely going to be their toughest battle yet, especially on defense. But Amari Cooper just seems a bit too cheap here. Again, he's been quiet the past couple weeks, and I do think CeeDee Lamb is the wide receiver one in this offense, but still averaging 9 targets per game. 23% target share is not great, but again, $6,000. Amari Cooper, I know he's dealing with the issue. I know he's dealing with the injury issue, which could obviously hold him back a little bit, but I just feel like this price is getting a little bit too low on a guy like Cooper. Odell Beckham Jr., $5,800. He's one of my favorite tournament plays on the entire slate. It's a very soft matchup versus Minnesota. Versus wide receivers last year, right now through 3 weeks, they're allowing the 4th most points per game to the position, over 50 DraftKings points per game, over 200 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. And Odell's return last week, he had 9 targets, had a 49% market share of the team's air yards and a 31% target share. And he looked pretty good last week. He looked healthy, so I definitely think this is a good spot for Odell. And a 53-point over-under and a 2-point spread on the road in the turf in Minnesota. And Devontae Smith, he's just your pairing option with Jalen Hurts. I know he was really awful last week, but as a 7-point dog here versus KC, who has kind of bled points defensively this year. They're 23rd versus wide receivers and dead last, 32nd DVA versus the pass. Definitely think this is a good bounce back spot here for Devontae Smith. Michael Pittman, $5,400. I think this is a good tournament option because I don't think a lot of people are going to be playing Pittman this week. As I wouldn't say this is the greatest matchup in the world versus Miami, but so far this season, he has a 47% market share of the team's air yards and over a 26% target share, averaging over 8 targets per game. I'm not really projecting him to be too chalky either. I'm not really excited about playing this game, but I think Pittman's definitely a really good option. Cole Beasley at $5,400. And the other thing is, Beasley and Robert Woods should pick up some ownership, so I just think that'll naturally lead to lower ownership for Michael Pittman. But Cole Beasley, he's been heavily peppered at the targets so far this year, averaging nearly 10 targets per game, over 7 catches. He's not a big play guy, which is evident due to his 5.6 ADOT and under a 15% market share of the team's air yards. But, I mean, on a PPR site like DraftKings, he can definitely pick up points in a hurry. So I definitely think he's a fine option. If he gets into the end zone, great, $5,400. If not, you're still getting a pretty solid day overall. Then Robert Woods, $5,300. I love Cooper Kupp. I love Matthew Stafford. I like this entire game. And Robert Woods has definitely been a letdown so far this season. But at some point, he's going to pop off. And with the defense really starting to focus on Cooper Kupp, I think at some point Woods is going to be due to have a really big game. I would not be surprised if it's here versus Arizona. He's still getting 6 targets per game. It's just not really turning into much fantasy points here because he's only getting 41 receiving yards per game so far. But I think he's going to be better than a 20% target share when the season's all said and done. So $5,300, definitely like buying low here on Robert Woods. Moving on to the tight ends up top, it's just Travis Kelce if you can afford him. I mean, there's never anything bad to say about Travis Kelce. Don't care about the matchup, don't care about the game script, don't care about anything. If you can afford Travis Kelce, congrats, you got the tight end one on the week typically every single time. And they have the highest flat team total. I mean, I don't think I have to show you these guys, but he has wide receiver 1 numbers, and you can roster him at tight end. George Kittle, $5,900, had a good game last week versus Green Bay. I think that continues here versus a pretty soft matchup against Seattle. He's also really cheap at $5,900, so I think this could lead to some pretty high ownership on George Kittle, but gives you access to what should be a decently high-scoring game. I already talked about that with Deebo Samuel, where I don't think it's going to be a super chalky game, although I think Samuel and George Kittle will probably be the highest owned of the bunch, but definitely don't mind them as targets here. So definitely think this price is a little bit too low on Kittle. Tyler Higbee, $4,600. He bounced back after a terrible week 2. It was good in week 1, awful week 2, good in week 3. I think he's probably going to be good once again versus Arizona. He's running all the routes at tight end for this team. He's the obvious tight end 1. And he should get you a handful of targets when it's all said and done. He always has a chance to get into the end zone. A team that likes to throw the ball quite a bit. Matthew Stafford has looked excellent so far through 3 weeks for the LA Rams. Definitely Super Bowl contenders this season. This is going to be a really tough team to beat. Then dropping to Noah Fant here, $4,300. He's just mainly a price play for me. We know he's a safe bet for targets. You get a handful of them each and every single week. Always has a chance to get into the end zone, and he has big playability. And those of you looking at the matchup versus Baltimore, you're going to see that they're dead last versus tight ends so far, getting absolutely murdered by them, allowing over 23 points per game. You gotta keep in mind though who they played. Like, yeah, you'd hope they'd be dead last after you hear the tight ends that they faced so far this season. Week 1, Darren Waller had nearly 20 targets. Week 2, Travis Kelce, the best tight end in football, one of the best of all time. Week 3, they actually stopped TJ Hawkinson. He didn't do much. TJ Hawkinson finished with what, like 2 or 3 points, and even then they're still dead last. So gotta keep in mind they've had pretty much the worst tight end schedule so far this year. Again, another tough matchup here versus Noah Fant, but I mean, I still think he's gonna be fine at that price point. And if you're looking for a dirt cheap option, we have Dalton Schultz here. Yes, Carolina's first DB versus the pass this year, and they're kind of stiffing tight ends with only the 6 fewest points per game, but Schultz was great last week. He's got a 13.5% target share in the season, getting 5 targets per game. Is that great? No, but it's solid at only $3,400, and it gets you a piece of what should be a pretty high-scoring game. And moving on to defenses, I always say the same thing, but all I try to do is try to find defenses that are either huge favorites at home, or they have low implied team totals, or it should be an overall low-scoring game, or the matchups are excellent. I usually try to spend down as well. So the Bills, Titans, Saints, I'm probably not going to get there unless I'm playing tournaments at 150 max and I just happen to have that much money left and it throws them in. But the Bills facing the Texans, I mean, yeah, 17-point favorites at home, 15.5 implied team total against them. I think that makes obvious sense here. The Titans, they're facing the Jets, 7.5-point favorites. Saints, 8.5-point favorites. Packers, 7-point favorites versus a wounded duck and Big Ben. Now, this is where you're probably going for cash games, either the Colts, Falcons, or Lions. The Lions should be pretty chalky this week. I mean, we saw how bad the Bears looked last week. Only 3-point dogs here, 42.5-point over-under should be an overall low-scoring game. The Falcons, only 1.5-point dogs here, 24.75 implied team total. It's not pretty, but Washington I'm not super concerned about. And the Colts defense, 1.5-point dogs here, but only a 22.5 implied team total with a 43.5-point over-under versus the backup quarterback in Jacoby Brissett. I would just really try to throw in the cheapest one you can possible because, I mean, who cares? It's defenses. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Now is the best time to do so considering it's the first of the month. It's your best bang for your buck. And plus, we'll have like 4 sports going on, so there's a lot of content over there. Plus, my spreadsheets, I think, are quite useful. It has everything you need on there, and I think you will enjoy them. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, for a new signee over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 and use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think that'll be it. I will stop rambling. I see you guys tomorrow for the lineup building video and core plays later in the evening.